Hi, welcome to everyone who's joining the webinar. We'll give everyone a minute to come into the room and then we'll get started. As people are joining, I'll just go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. First of all, I see a lot of names of our volunteers, so welcome and thank you. Happy National Volunteer Month. That was the inspiration for this webinar. And for anyone who hasn't volunteered with Aleo in the past, we'll be sharing information about our legal content volunteer program with the survey that we send after this webinar. So don't worry, you can get in on the fun too. As people are joining, we'll get started in just a minute. I'll quickly mention information about the CLE credit. I'll send this in an email afterwards too. We will be recording today's webinar, but CLE credit is only available for the live presentation today. The program has been approved for 1 hour of Illinois MCLE credit, and as long as you submitted your ARDC number when you registered, you are all set. You don't need to do anything else. We will email you your attendance certificate in the next few weeks. If you do have any questions, though, feel free to email me. We'll add my contact information to the chat. So any questions about CLE credit, feel free to email. We'll give just one more question and then we will go ahead and get started. See lots of people joining. Welcome. We're happy to have you here. Just give a few more seconds for people to join. Welcome everyone and happy National Volunteer Month to our volunteers. Okay, I think to make sure we're respectful of everyone's time, we will go ahead and get started. First of all, welcome to everyone. I still see people joining. Welcome. Thank you for joining us for Justice Without Jargon. I will start out by introducing the presenters, and I wanted to start off by welcoming Alison Spanner. We're thrilled to have Alison with us. Alison's the Director of Access to Justice and Strategic Planning at the Administrative Office of the Illinois Courts. In her work, she identifies policy and programmatic solutions to reduce barriers to participating in the court process that people without lawyers, limited English proficient people, and people with disabilities often face. She also works with the Illinois Judicial Conference, an interdisciplinary committee of the Illinois Supreme Court that engages in strategic planning for the court and suggests improvements in the administration of justice. I'm also one of our panelists. I am Tracy Simmons. I'm a legal content manager at Illinois Legal Aid Online. I work to ensure the accuracy of Aleo's legal information, and I also work to ensure it's written in plain language. I started my career as an attorney and Equal Justice Works Fellow at the Legal Aid Society of Columbus, where I created plain language, know your rights materials for self-represented individuals. And I also taught legal research and writing in Wilbur Wright College's paralegal program, where I focused my curriculum on plain language drafting principles. Finally, we have Marcin Gulick, who is the Promotion and Translation Manager at Illinois Legal Aid Online. Marcin conducts plain language reviews of Aleo content and leads Aleo's internal plain language training efforts. Before coming to Aleo, Marcin interned at the National Criminal Justice Association, and he also worked as the managing editor and community manager for a retro gaming magazine, Megavisions. I also wanted to quickly preview our agenda for today. We'll start out talking about plain language and access to justice, and then we'll get into specific principles and techniques you can use in your own writing. Then we'll talk about tools that can help your plain language writing. And we will do some practice exercises together. So don't worry, you get to try all this out today too. We will leave time at the end for questions. But you can also feel free to submit any questions you have through the question feature. Questions are only submitted to the presenters, not everyone, and we'll share any ideas, thoughts, questions you have anonymously. During the plain language workshop, you'll also be able to raise your hand and we can unmute you if you'd like to share your ideas that way. So now that you know all of us, I will go ahead and pass things off to Alison to get us started talking about plain language writing and access to justice.
Thank you, Tracy. I am going to share my screen so I can have the PowerPoint up. I am just beyond thrilled to be able to talk about this topic today in a personal passion of mine, which is plain language. When I started at the administrative office of the Illinois court about 10 years ago, I was overseeing the statewide standardized court forms project, and our relationship with ALEO serves on each one of our form subcommittees and provides plain language assistance in the development of those court forms was invaluable to the work we're doing, and it remains invaluable to the work we're doing for statewide standardized court forms today. And so when I talk about access to justice and we talk about the justice gap, we're talking about a lot of the problems, and we do really need to understand what problems the court system is facing with the increasing numbers of self-represented litigants and the low number of attorneys who can't address that need. We do need to see it as a problem that we can take meaningful steps to solve. And in doing that, we can rely on partnerships and various strengths that various organizations have in order to close that justice gap. So what do I mean when I say the justice gap? The Legal Services Corporation defines the justice gap as the difference between the civil legal needs of low-income Americans and the resources available to meet those needs. And right now we have a mismatch. We have far more numbers of people who need legal help than are receiving meaningful legal help. And not only, I'm going to talk about from the court's perspective, the Illinois Supreme Court and the Commission on Access to Justice, what our response has been over the last 10 years or so. But know that legal aid attorneys play a role, private attorneys who offer their services at a reasonable price or do pro bono work or limited scope appearances play a role in closing the justice gap. Organizations like ALEO, Illinois Free Legal Answers, Illinois Court Help all play a role in providing much needed resources to
I think we're having some technical issues. Marcin, were you able to hear Alison, or it looks like we maybe lost her?
It looks like she froze.
Okay. We'll give her 1 minute, and then if not, we can go ahead and move on to the next section. And when the technology agrees with us, we can come back to this really important context information.
Sounds good.
Okay. Yeah, it looks like we lost her share. So why don't I go ahead and we can go back whenever the technology agrees with us, and I'll go ahead and move on. We can talk about principles and techniques first, and then kind of go back to our conversation about access to justice. So let me just share my screen. Thank you for your patience, everyone. Okay, So again, we'll hop back to Alison's portion in just a minute. I wanted to talk through specific techniques for plain language writing and design, and hopefully it's something that you can use in your daily writing. So what do we mean when we say plain language? We mean that a reader can understand what's written the first time that they read the information, and that your writing is understood by your intended audience, which is not always a law-trained person. So this is not an easy task, right? Plain language drafting is asking us as legal writers to take complicated legal concepts and make them approachable and understandable while not oversimplifying them too much that the information, the meaning is lost. So legal information has historically, or legal writing, I'm sorry, has historically been known as wordy, full of jargon, and difficult to read. Forms and language are handed down from attorney to attorney, often for the sake of efficiency and learning, which is understandable, but there has been a movement towards plain language drafting, and I think as a profession, we can continue to grow in this area, and this growth is really critical to the access to justice movement. So, what are the principles of plain language writing? As you know, there's a lot of different types of legal writing, client letters, analytical memos, persuasive briefs. Today, we're going to be focusing on plain language writing, principles that can be broadly applied to different types of legal writing. So there's many other plain language drafting principles, but for today, we're going to focus on these broadly applicable principles, including choosing simple words, removing extra words, using short sentences, keeping subjects and verbs together, using strong active verbs, avoiding zombie nouns, using named or personal pronouns, using parallel structure, avoiding multiple negatives, and writing out acronyms. I see Alison has rejoined us. Do you want me to skip back to your spot in the presentation? I'll keep going for a minute. Feel free to turn on your camera and interrupt me whenever you'd like to jump back in. And at the center of all this, though, we are going to be thinking about our reader first and foremost.
I do apologize, everyone. That has never happened in all of the webinars and all of the meetings, never in the middle of my conversation as my computer shut down on me. So I apologize.
Oh,
Tracy, do you want me to continue?
Yeah, that would be great. Do you want to share?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Great.
Let me do that now. Okay, I hope everybody is seeing my screen again. All right, so as I was saying, when we talk about the justice gap, we have to think both about the problem at large and how we can work together to solve it, and what amazing work is already being done with volunteer programs like the one being run through Aleo. So I'm going to talk about the justice gap in terms of sort of the crisis we're facing in the courts. But first, I want to really put like a firm point on understanding what it means for low-income litigants in Illinois, the Midwest, and nationally. So each year, more than 30 million Americans encounter civil legal problems. And I know you are all familiar with this, but I want to just, again, reiterate, we're talking about basic needs. So debt collection, eviction, foreclosure, child custody, guardianship claims, all types of claims that have incredibly profound, life-changing impacts, and something that has to be resolved within the court process. As the slide reflects, this is through an LSC recent report that in the Midwest, 14% of the population live at 125% or below the poverty line. And for Illinois, that's 2.2 million people. For a family of four at 125% of the poverty line, they are making $46,000 as a family or less. So what we're facing is a significant number of low-income Illinoisans, and what the LSC study also pointed to is that low-income people have a high number of civil legal issues. So again, those order protection, eviction, foreclosure, child custody. And in a period of time during the study, it was found that 75% of all low-income families had at least one or more civil legal problem. So when people have civil legal problems and they recognize they have civil legal problems, they have to use the court process in order to be able to resolve them. It is consistently reported that 75% or more of all cases have at least one self-represented litigant. And I'm just going to pause on that point, because what that means is that it's not attorneys or attorneys with litigants that are the highest number of people accessing the courts. It is self-represented litigants, period. That's the highest number of people accessing the court, the number one court user. And that is somebody who has no legal experience, no legal education, and limited resources to be able to figure out how to access a very challenging process. This is confirmed, and the challenge, I should say, is confirmed by this LSC report that found that of people who sought help, only 25% received legal help, and 93% didn't receive any help or enough legal help to help them resolve their legal problem. So let's look at Illinois specifically. So there are approximately 378 legal aid attorneys for every total in the state, and that is going to serve the needs of 2.2 low-income people in 2.2 million low-income people in Illinois. So we can affirmatively state there are not enough legal aid attorneys. There are not enough attorneys generally, even if a low-income person could afford an attorney to be able to address all of the legal needs. And this again is affirmed by the LSC program, where approximately 417,000 eligible problems were brought to LSC, but they were unable to provide any or enough legal help for 73% of those problems. So what we have is a court system where self-represented litigants are going it alone, and they are confused about the process. They're struggling with the legal jargon. They're confused by forms. They're faced with opposing counsel. They're in crowded court calls, and it's very high stakes, stressful conflict. Now, I'm going to shift the focus a little bit to the crisis the court itself is facing. So when we all went to law school for 3 years, and then we've dedicated our lives to practicing law, we assumed, I think, that the legal practice would operate the way it was intended, to be the administrators of justice, quick, speedy, and free. And the problem is that with the growing number of self-represented litigants, the court system isn't adapting fast enough to be able to sufficiently address those problems. And when we can't address those problems, we have a real breakdown in the court process and what it means to administer justice. Let's look at default judgments and small claims to get a very practical example. So for jurisdictions across the country that can collect small claims data, what it is showing is that 70% of lawsuits in the areas of small claims or consumer debt end in default judgment. And as many of you, I'm certain, know, default judgment means that the judge did not independently evaluate the merits of the case. There was no consideration of the facts held within the complaint. There was no opposing party to raise defenses. The process does not operate as intended. So when litigants are confused, when they're unable to go to court, when they don't understand the process, the legal system itself breaks down. So the justice gap isn't just about not being able to serve the legal needs of low-income Americans. It's also a significant challenge and crisis when we're looking at the court system. And that was something that the Illinois Supreme Court foresaw when it created the Illinois Supreme Court Commission on Access to Justice, which I have the pleasure of staffing along with members of my staff. And the court created the commission in 2012, and we're governed by Supreme Court Rule 10-100, and we are under a 5-year strategic plan. And I want to clarify that you also hear phrases like the Administrative Office of the Illinois Courts, which is where our statewide standardized court forms live, for example. The Administrative Office of the Illinois Courts is the constitutional office that's charged with supporting the Chief Justice and the Illinois Supreme Court, and it's where the Access to Justice Division, my staff and myself, are employed. But we have been charged with fulfilling the mission of the commission, which is to address barriers to participating in the civil court system for all court users, but with a special emphasis on people without lawyers. And it's important to really focus in on what we mean when we say access to justice, because that's an incredibly broad term. And what it means is that there's meaningful access. I should say what it means to the commission, what it means to me. It can mean a lot of different things to many different people. But the way that I like to grapple with it, and the way that important things like writing and plain language play a role, is that it has to be meaningful access. Somebody has to be able to meaningfully participate. It's not enough that they get to the front doors of the courthouse or that they get through security. They have to fully understand the information they're receiving and then be able to actually act upon it in a meaningful way. So that's the commission's vision for the courts, that it's an accessible and innovative court system that serves people equitably and empowers them to participate meaningfully in the resolution of their legal issues. So there's a variety of ways that the commission does this. I've already touched briefly on our relationship with ALEO and our statewide standardized court form process. We also have a variety of committees. For example, our Disability Access Committee was just recently released an Illinois Supreme Court Disability Access Policy that applies to circuit court, appellate courts, and the Supreme Court. And we also run a statewide hotline called Illinois Court Help that has assisted 32,000 people about 70,000 times. Like, we've engaged with people 70,000 times and addressed their legal issues on e-filing, court forms, referrals to attorneys. And we've also talked with people in all 102 counties and provided them with legal information. So that's some of the ways that the commission is addressing the justice gap issue. And of course, we're firmly in the information giving area rather than advice giving area, but there's still so much impact that can be made by simply giving information. Because when you don't have an attorney, the currency really is the information and what you can do with it. So this graph is from the National Center for State Courts, and I just want to briefly touch on this idea that the closing of the justice gap can be segmented and attacked from multiple ways. So pro bono and legal aid, unbundled legal services, that's absolutely vital. The need for attorneys to speak with clients or litigants for brief service will never go away. It's what people want, it's what people expect, it's what they need. But what we're dealing with is those that we're unable to connect one-on-one with an attorney. So that's sort of underneath the line. And that is in some ways a court-led strategy, like the court navigators, Illinois Court Help, for example, and various self-help centers. But with self-help resources, it's also organizations like ALEO, etc. So, and then there's process improvements and simplification efforts, which is where I want to end my conversation today. Because the process improvements and simplification efforts can take a variety of forms, from rule amendments to the creation of a policy. And there is a Supreme Court policy on plain language. So this is some top-down support and leadership that the Illinois Supreme Court has on encouraging everyone that touches the court system to communicate in plain language in a way that litigants can understand and use the information that they're being provided. So I have included on the screen the purpose and scope of the policy on plain language. And then on my next slide, which is my last slide, really what the plain language policy is. All informational documents and informational instructions shall be drafted in plain language whenever practicable. So if you want to go back to your organization, your legal aid, wherever you work, and say to your boss, like, I'd love to plain language some of these resources, particularly the public resources, and apply the skills that I've learned today in this webinar, you can back it up with a policy supporting document like the policy on plain language and say it's clearly, a directive from the Illinois Supreme Court that we engage in this type of writing. I'm pretty sure that no one in this webinar would argue with that in any way, shape, or form, that we should be writing in plain language. But just know that this is something, of a top priority for the Supreme Court, for the Commission on Access to Justice, and we'll continue to work on developing those resources through relationships with ALEO and other organizations across the state of Illinois. So again, I apologize for my technical difficulties, and I look forward to hearing the rest of the presentation. Tracy, I will turn it back to you now.
Thank you so much, Alison, and thank you for sharing that really important context on plain language and how critical it is for access to justice. I will go ahead and share my screen again, and we'll pick up where we left off and start jumping into different plain language writing principles that you can use in your day-to-day writing. So let's start out by talking about choosing simple words. Every profession has its own language or insider talk. Law enforcement, medical professionals, the legal profession, we have a name for it, legalese. And so we want to be aware of this, though. Here's an example on the screen of a law enforcement language. Officer Smith observed two individuals exiting the store in a swift manner. When Officer Smith tried to initiate a verbal exchange with the individuals, they fled. Officer Smith promptly engaged in a foot pursuit. Okay, so that's not how we would talk in everyday language. That's not really plain language. That's some law enforcement insider talk. So how could we make that plain language? How about instead we say, Officer Smith saw two people leave the store quickly. When she tried to talk with them, they ran. Officer Smith ran after them. And you can see when we remove this jargon, we get something that's more concise and clear. And I think it's just really important to be aware of this insider language. It's so natural within a profession, but you want to be aware of it in your writing. There are times when we have legal terms of art that really can't be simplified. In that case, try to define the term of art within that same sentence. So for example, if you're talking about habeas corpus, you could explain that as a challenge to unlawful imprisonment. Generally, though, if you can say something more simply, do so. And a quick pro tip for you, avoid the word shall. Shall isn't plain English. We as legal writers often use shall, though. We learned in law school that shall means something important. It means mandatory as opposed to permissive. But shall can be ambiguous, especially to non-law trained people. It can sound like something that's happening in the future, and it's just not used in everyday language. So must is normally a really good replacement for shall. It's a clearer way to say that something's required and is just a bit more plain language. I wanted to quickly highlight this resource. The National Center for State Courts has a plain language glossary. So it's a great resource for thinking through how to simplify language, especially when you're writing for the public. You can see a few examples on the slide. Instead of saying substantial portion, we could say a large part. Instead of saying proxy, we could say a person who makes decisions for another. I also wanted to highlight that the National Center for State Courts shared two resources with us specifically for this webinar. One is a clear communication resource list, and one is a clear communication checklist. Both are wonderful plain language resources, and I would encourage you to look at them after the webinar. Okay, so while we're thinking about the words that we're using, we also want to think about removing extra words. Most writers, even really good writers, create wordy first drafts. Knowing this is powerful. By understanding that it is natural to write with more words than we need, we can make sure that we don't get stuck on the language in our first draft. Instead, we want to approach our first drafts very critically with an understanding that we need to remove unneeded words and phrases. And two specific tips I wanted to share with you as you approach your first drafts is, first of all, to watch out for the word of in your writing. One way you can often find wordiness is by finding the ofs. Not always a problem, but it will often lead you to phrases that can be condensed. So here on the example we have is employees were given lump sum bonuses for the company's success. That's a shorter way of saying the success of the company. So just become skeptical of the word of. Um, I would also say watch out for repetitive words and phrases. Legal writing is known for being redundant. I give, devise, and bequeath. Give is probably sufficient for all of that, so pay attention to those doubled up or tripled up words and ask, are all of these words really necessary? If one word includes the meaning of another, you can just use the one word to encompass the full meaning. On the right side of this slide, I've also included some examples from the Office of the Federal Register of commonly used wordy phrases in legal writing. So you can see that of makes an appearance on this list a few times, but just a good reference, hopefully, and you can watch for those phrases in your writing. So now that we've thought about the words we're going to use within our sentences, let's think about our sentences too. On average, you want to aim for sentences that are 20 words or less. Average sentence length is a huge component of how easily readers will be able to follow your ideas. This is why readability formulas rely heavily on sentence length. So while we want to aim for 20 words or less as an average, variety is also good. You may have some 35-word sentences and some 3-word sentences. Variety helps highlight different concepts and will also give your writing a cadence that can help bring your reader along. In legal writing, we're often trying to convey complex ideas, but you don't have to say everything at once. You don't have to pack all the legal requirements or qualifications into one sentence, and your reader will appreciate it if you break those difficult concepts down into smaller, more digestible chunks. So here we have an original sentence that says, it's important to check any resource overpayments for months in which the overpayment exceeded the limit by $50 or less to make sure that SSA has not charged an overpayment for that month. So there's a few issues with that, but we can quickly, you can see though, it's wordy. It's at 34 words in that sentence. We can pretty quickly revise this and make it a more active sentence, take out some extra words, and instead say, confirm the SSA did not charge an overpayment for months your resources were over the limit by $50 or less. So there we've hit the 20 words and it's more readable and understandable. Okay, as we're looking at our sentence structure, let's also think about keeping our subjects and verbs together. So we want to keep subjects and verbs together and also generally towards the beginning of the sentence. These complicated legal sentences, it's often easy for the subject and verb to get separated. We want to avoid that. Your readers are going to look for the action in your sentence, so putting the subject and verb up front makes your sentence easier to read and to follow. You don't have to start with the subject every time, and you may want to vary your phrasing, but you want to get to the subject and verb pretty quickly. So here in our original, you can see the subject, court, is separated by a long phrase in the middle from the verb, ruled. So let's see how we can revise that. So instead of saying the court, in finding that Officer McGee was acting more as a school employee than as a police officer in searching Robinson, ruled, very confusing, we can simply say the court ruled that an official's primary role is not law enforcement in finding that Officer McGee was acting more as a school employee than as a police officer. Or if you do want to vary your structure, you certainly could have an introductory phrase, because that is still a long chunk of information talking about the ruling. So you could put a little of it in an introductory phrase, but then still pretty quickly get to your subject and verb and say the court ruled to finish your sentence. Okay, while we're thinking about our verbs, we want to use strong active verbs and avoid passive voice. Active voice is generally more clear and concise. Be verbs, which are often found in passive voice, lack force. And so some be verbs that are the most commonly problematic are listed here on the slide: is, are, was, and were. So be on the lookout for those words in your writing. So as you're looking to change your sentences into active voice, think, who's your actor or the subject of the sentence, and what action are they taking? So here our original is, this is a purely legal question to be determined by the court. Our be verb is. How can we change that to make the court our subject or actor and use a stronger verb? Well, let's revise it to say the court, our actor, will decide purely legal questions. More concise, more clearly gets to the point quickly for our reader. So as you're editing, watch for these be verbs and try to eliminate them. Okay, another thing we want to avoid is zombie nouns. What, you may ask, are zombie nouns? They are abstract nouns made from verbs. For the English majors out there, also known as nominalizations, but zombie nouns is much more fun to say. So generally you can find these because they'll normally have an ION ending and they can be made into a verb. So here our example: Grimes was in violation of the law. Violation is our zombie noun with that ION ending and can easily be made into a verb. You can see it can move into Grimes violated the law. More concise, we're now using an active verb instead of passive voice. So you can see here's a few other examples of phrases we can condense into one word and avoid those zombie nouns. Instead of make an accommodation for, we could say accommodate. Conduct an examination of, examine. Submit an application, apply. Okay, then we also want to focus in plain language on using names or personal pronouns. Legal writers often refer to people as their role: petitioner, plaintiff, applicant, debtor, parent, instead of by name or with personal pronouns. Our writing is stronger and we're better able to connect with our readers when we humanize our writing with names and personal pronouns. And as we're thinking about humanizing our language, it's also critical to ensure that we're using gender-inclusive writing. Gender-inclusive language is language that respects a person's gender identity regardless of their sex assigned at birth. It includes pronouns, names, titles, other forms of address. That definition comes from the National Center for State Courts resource titled Gender Inclusivity in the Courts. I've included a link to that resource as well as other resources on gender inclusive language on our additional resources page. This is a topic that we could do an entire presentation on. So I would encourage you to check out those additional resources on this topic. I also wanted to highlight one tool in your toolbox for using gender inclusive language in your writing, and it's they. They can be used as a gender neutral singular pronoun. So instead of using a gendered pronoun like he or she, if you're not sure what someone's preferred pronoun is, or you're looking for a gender neutral way to write something, you can use they. So let's look at an example of this. Our original says the applicant must help the Department of Human Services establish child support from the father. Unless good cause exists, the applicant must share his name with DHS. So we can revise this to say you must help the Department of Human Services establish child support from the other parent. Unless good cause exists, you must share their name with DHS. So here in our revised version, we're using personal pronouns and gender inclusive language to better reach our audience. And it's also more accurate. Okay, a few more plain language principles, and we're going to talk about design, and then you get a chance to try all this. So I'll just quickly breeze through these. With plain language, we want to make sure we're using parallel structures. We'll talk more in a minute about the use of lists, but lists can really help reinforce your message and make information more memorable. They're also an area, though, where you want to check for parallel construction. So here, the first example, you see we have a list within the sentence, advising, advocating, and communication. That's not the same structure. So we want to revise that to say attorneys are responsible for advising, advocating, and communicating with their clients. We also want to avoid multiple negatives, but I would like to take that a step farther and say that when we can write something in a positive instead of a negative, do that instead. It will save your readers mental work. One negative isn't bad, but multiple negatives can really confuse the meaning of your sentence. So here we move from multiple negatives and passive voice to just one negative and active voice. It was not unreasonable to find the jurors did not believe the witness. And instead, we could say that as the court reasonably found that the jurors did not believe the witness. And then finally, we want to write out acronyms, spell out acronyms the first time you use them, and then you can follow them with an abbreviation in parentheses that you can use throughout the rest of your writing. Okay, so we're going to move on now to talk about plain language design quickly. Plain language drafting really is two parts. One part is the words that you write. The second part is design, or how you form those words on the page. And both are really critical to ensuring that your language is readable. So as we discuss plain language design, we'll break it in all the topics on the screen into two main categories, fonts and formatting, and then creating white space. So let's start out by talking about fonts and formatting. First, choose a clear, readable font, unlike the one that I have on the slide here. You don't want to choose fonts that have extremely thin strokes like this one, or unusual features that reduce the familiarity of their letter forms. That makes it harder for your reader to read them. There's lots of different opinions on fonts, but generally ask yourself, does this look like a font I would see in a good book or in a magazine? Is it familiar? You want to choose something that's familiar to your reader. Also, you want to make sure that you use a readable font size, generally at least 12-point font. For emphasis, lean into boldface or text boxes. Underlining is generally not preferred. Underlining is less readable and it can easily be confused with hyperlinks, especially online. We also don't want to use all caps. It's kind of like screaming at someone. We don't want to do that to our reader. And beyond that, when you're using all caps, individual letters lose their distinctive features and become uniform. And that makes it harder for our readers to understand what you've written. Initial caps are also not preferred. They create kind of these visual hiccups and stopping points that can slow down our reader and create issues with readability. So again, you're better off using boldface for emphasis. You can see the example on the slide where we move from title case to sentence case. So we remove those initial capitalizations and bold instead for that heading. Okay, and then we're going to talk about ways to create white space quickly before I turn it over to Marcin. Readers can be really discouraged when they hit just a dense page of text. So how do we incorporate white space into our writing? First, using descriptive headings. Think about using headings that are going to make your organization clear and help your reader navigate through those complicated legal concepts. Headings act as signposts for our hurried readers and help them through the written materials. We also want to use short paragraphs. Similar to sentence length, shorter paragraphs are more digestible to readers. Also, like sentence length, varied paragraph lengths are good, but you generally do want to aim to keep them short. And it is okay to have 1 to 2 sentence paragraphs sometimes. Finally, bulleted and numbered lists are a great way to catch readers' attention. Generally, we want to use those numbered lists to list items sequentially or in steps. Otherwise, you can use bullets. Make sure, again, like we talked about earlier, that the items on your list are grammatically parallel. One other strategy for creating white space that I just wanted to mention is tables and graphics. They're a very powerful way to convey information. Numbers and calculations often lend themselves really well to tables. Be sure to introduce and clearly explain the information in your table or graphic. Here we have an introductory sentence and then bolded headings to ensure that the information in the table is clear. And I just wanted to end by emphasizing how important design can be. Here we have a short paragraph. We have a Fleisch-Kincaid grade level score of 6.7, which is pretty good. At Aleo, we aim for 8th grade or below. So we might think that we're doing pretty good. I had to read this a few times though. And so I thought, well, I must need to revise it. So I didn't really revise the words I was writing, but I revised the design of it. So you can see when we add in bullets, when we add in a little bit of white space, it's clearer to read. So I will go ahead at this point. Now that you have all these tools in your toolbox, I will turn it over to Marcin to talk about tools you can use and do some practice exercises.
Thanks, Tracy. All right, I will share my screen. Okay. All right. So first, we're going to go over a number of tools that you can use to assist yourself with plain language editing. And at Aleo, we use a number of different tools to assist us in plain language writing, and one of them is Readable. Now, Readable is a paid program. I believe it's around $140 annually, but it's a very, very helpful tool when it comes to editing your writing and making sure that it's in plain language. If you can see over here, this is the layout of what Readable is. So what it does is you could upload your content a number of ways to determine your readability level. So you can simply copy and paste your content, or you can do a bulk upload of all of your pieces of content that you have on the website. So you could put all your URLs on a spreadsheet and you can upload it and it'll mass review your content for plain language. So I'm going to show you guys an example right here. Hopefully you can see this. This is one of the exercises we're going to do right after I go over these tools. And you can see that this current iteration of this paragraph is at a grade of E, and it's at a 21 grade level on the Fleisch-Kincaid grade level score. Now you'll see that there's a number of different readability levels that exist in multiple different industries, but the Fleisch-Kincaid grade level is the most common grade level that people use to measure plain language assistance and readability. So when you're reviewing pieces of content like this specific paragraph, Readable will show you why it is at the grade level that it is. You'll see that it is highlighted as a very long sentence. It is one long sentence. And as we know, during Tracy's presentation, it's preferable to have short sentences. You want to involve white space, bulleted lists where you can, and this is not demonstrating that at all. You'll see at the bottom, as you scroll down, all these different forms of issues that can potentially pop up. Words with 30 or more syllables, 20 syllables, issues with writing style, if it's written in passive voice, profanity count. So that's kind of subjective, but in this specific, it highlights failure as a profanity. And it does a whole bunch of things to analyze your text. But this is one of the main tools that Aleo uses to review our content for plain language. Now, we kind of talked about as well uh, in terms of plain language, as it's not necessarily an exact science, it's more of an art form because there is more than one right way to write your content and write it in plain language. Um, and I'm going to show you that in a couple of minutes with our exercises. But in the next version, I'll show you another tool that we use. If you use Microsoft Word or Google Docs, I'll show you Microsoft Word as an example for this one. It also has its own built-in tool to determine your readability level. So if you go to the Review tab and then you click on word count, you're going to go see on the far right side the readability score of this specific document. It'll tell you that it's difficult to read, and it gives you an editor score along with a number of suggestions that you can take when you're editing your content. It talks about conciseness, formality, certain grammar issues. It's a good tool to have with Microsoft Word, but I don't think it's as helpful as Readable. Now, there's another tool that a lot of people talk about, and I think it's a giant buzz word that people have been throwing around: the use of AI, artificial intelligence, these chat programs that are essentially revolutionizing our industry, and it's been the topic of conversation for the past year or two. And it's really been, I think, at the forefront of the legal aid community as well, and how organizations can implement AI like ChatGPT, Bing Chat, which is now Copilot, and Bard, which is now called Gemini. There's a number of different AI chats that can assist you. And again, for those of you that don't know what AI or ChatGPT is, maybe you've heard about it. Essentially, it's like an assistance tool. I mean, they call it Copilot. It's kind of like a Copilot. You can ask it anything. You can ask it, to come up with a marketing idea. You can ask it, why are cats cool? You can ask it for baking recipes. There's a number of different ways that you can use ChatGPT, that you can use Gemini as a tool to assist. And plain language is one that it can help you with when it comes to readability. I'll show you a number of prompts that you can use to help assist with changing your existing content. So again, I'm going to use that upcoming exercise as an example. You can see I already put in a couple of prompts in here, and ChatGPT will show you a number of different responses depending on the prompt that you put in. And that's a very important thing to note when you're using ChatGPT for plain language, for translations, for anything really. As of these iterations, it doesn't necessarily know what you specifically mean by plain language. And I'll show you what I mean by that. So in the first iteration, we have write this at an 8th grade reading level, and that's my prompt. Right after I put in the specific text that I want written at an 8th grade reading level, and you'll see it spit out this right here. If you don't respond within 30 days, it might be seen as agreeing to what's being asked for, unless the department or another agency asks for more time or says they want to talk things over. Now, if we're comparing this to the initial prompt, it is written a little better, but this still feels more of a run-on sentence. If you remember Tracy's exercise, shorter sentences, simpler terms, this feels more of a run-on sentence. And personally, I would shorten this. But for example, if we copy and paste this into Readable, let's see what it determines as the readability score. So you'll see, not great. The initial one was about 21. It dropped to 14.6. So again, the general prompt, if you just write this as is, you'll be getting different responses. If I change the prompt from 8th grade reading level to write this in plain language, again, it gives me a slightly different response, and you can see that the readability level will adjust accordingly based on its prompt. So when I ask for the prompt of write in plain language, you'll see that it dropped to about a 9.5 readability score on the Flesch-Kincaid grade level, which is better. And again, when you're using ChatGPT, I think it's important for you as an individual to test these different kinds of prompts to see. And I think it's important to highlight it's a tool and it's not necessarily the be all end all answer. So use it for writer's block or when you can't come up with a specific idea or concept or the right words to use, perhaps it'll clear that writer's block. And I think that's where ChatGPT and a lot of these AI chat tools at their current iteration are good and useful for. I tried to be a little more specific in this third prompt. I write this at an 8th grade reading level, and then I included a bunch of suggested strategies that Tracy mentioned earlier. Write in short sentences, use names or personal pronouns, keep the subject and verb together, avoid multiple negatives, avoid zombie nouns. And then it gave me this specific prompt right here. If I could highlight it. And you'll see it's at 7.6, which is good. And again, you can see that this second sentence on readable suggests this one's still kind of long, so we could potentially shorten this even more. But that's just one iteration of ChatGPT as an AI tool, as an assist tool. I'll also show you Copilot. So Copilot is what was Bing Chat before. And again, I've asked it the same specific questions and prompts. And you can see as you scroll down, these are all giving similar responses. There were some slight differences. At least these two split up the sentences a little better. But again, it's entirely subjective. And I think it does a good enough job, but I think everyone's grammatical mind can do better in shortening it and making it more plain language. And as an aside, these programs are free if you guys are curious. So ChatGPT, Copilot, Gemini, they're all free tools that you can use. The only one that is payable or that is paid for is Readable. And as I mentioned, it's about $140 annually. But it's a really good tool to use. Now we're going to go into our plain language exercises. Now, Tracy, if you could unmute yourself and also just if anyone raises their hand or if they have any suggestions, we'll have folks look at this for a minute or two. And everyone who has a suggestion on how to change this, please feel free to raise your hand, to put it in the chat, and we'll go from there. We'll have 3 exercises. And I'll have an example as well of a potential suggestion. So in case you can't think of one, we have one provided. So with this first exercise, the prompt is failure to file an answer within the 30-day period may be treated as consent to the award requested unless the department or other agency requests an extension of time. I'm short of breath reading this, for filing or files a statement of intent to negotiate under paragraph B of this section. Now, I'll give you guys a minute or two to read this, and please feel free to offer any suggestions you might have. Let's put those tools to the test.
And if you do add ideas into the question feature, I'll share anything anonymously. But I love when we can learn from each other as writers. Yeah, I see we have a hand raised, China. So we'll try to make it so you can unmute yourself and share. Let's see, are you unable to, or are you able to unmute yourself?
Yeah, if you're also having difficulty, feel free to just put your explanation in the chat as well.
Yeah, it looks like there may be some microphone difficulties. So someone suggested instead, starting out, we request an extension of time for filing, or we file an answer versus just, oh, I'm sorry, we file an answer within 30 days. The department assumes that you agree with them unless the department requests more time to file or wants to talk with you. That's great. And I like that you're adding in personalized language, like talking with you.
That's a good suggestion. Was it in
Yeah.
multiple sentences?
Let me go back. Sorry, a few were popping in. So
You're okay.
one sentence with a comma there to set off a phrase.
That's good.
Let's see. Also, you can add and then like kind of A and then B. So to breaking it out. Um, yeah, another person said they debated file and answer versus just answer, but decided that file is the action that this needs to convey. Yeah, I like how you're thinking about the verbs there.
Good.
And one more that, sorry, I am trying to find them all, but they're moving as things come in. You must file an answer within 30 days unless the department requests an extension of time or files a statement of intent. New sentence. If you do not file an answer, you may have to pay the award to the other, the award the other party requested. I like that. I like breaking it into two sentences like that.
That's good. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good rule of thumb is, even with this sentence, which kind of looks like a paragraph, I think it's important to, shorten it. And you can, this is possible to split into multiple sentences. So yeah, great job. Any other ones?
Let's see. Hopefully I didn't miss any. We file a statement of intent to negotiate. Yeah, I think we got them all. Yeah.
Awesome.
And I like that people are focused on getting to the verb too.
Yes. Very important. So I'm going to show you guys an example of this specific exercise. So this is what we put together. So you must file an answer within 30 days. If you do not, you agree to the requested award. This does not apply if, and then we created a list. The department asked for more time to file, or the department wants to negotiate. So you can see that it's split into multiple sentences. We talked about earlier during Tracy's portion that a list makes it much more readable and easily accessible. We talked about white space and just seeing something in a paragraph versus shorter sentences and a list form allows for the reader to just digest it easier and might not be as overwhelming for your reader or user who's reading your content. All right, we'll jump into the next exercise now that you see some examples. All right. Now, exercise 2, this one talks about dietary restrictions, vitamins, and minerals. So you'll see this paragraph includes a lot of commas, a lot of lists within the paragraph itself. So I'll read it out, and then you guys can take a couple of minutes to review and offer your own suggestions like we just did with exercise 1. Efforts may be warranted to promote increased dietary intakes of potassium, fiber, and possibly vitamin E, regardless of age. Increased intakes of calcium and possibly vitamins A as carotenoids or carotenoids. See, I can't even read. I'm talking about grammar. And C and magnesium by adults. Efforts are warranted to increase intakes of calcium and possibly magnesium by children aged 9 years or older. So I'll give you guys a couple of minutes again to look at this yourself and offer any suggestions for this one.
We already have some good ideas coming in. Make it easier to read by using bullet points.
Mm-hmm. Big one.
Yeah. Another comment, which I think is great, I've found that consistently using gender neutral language can really help protect your client's identity in proffers or similar situations where an accidental slip up reveals that a person's gender and can endanger them by helping others identify them. I think that's a really good point.
That is a really good point. I don't know if we talked about this earlier, but especially when you're dealing with clients, as Illinois Legal Aid provides public information and our content is, to the public. If you're dealing with, clients or issues dealing with victims of violence and domestic abuse, I think using those gender neutral terms are very important when it comes to those specific scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah, great point. Thank you for adding that. Another suggestion is adults of all ages may benefit from eating more foods with potassium, fiber, and then kind of moving into that list form based on the category of person.
That's good.
Yeah, and another person says separate out by age. If you're an adult, then this. If you know, if you're a child age 9 or older, then this. Everyone else, this. And
Awesome.
also, I think that one other comment that I think is great is to maybe provide examples of the food that fits certain descriptions. Again, that idea of not using insider jargon, but defining what we're talking about.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, keep them coming. These are really good suggestions and additional context, especially involving specific scenarios. Super helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, I had one more just come in. Replace efforts may be warranted with it's recommended. Thank you. Yeah, we just made 4 words into 2.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, maybe warranted is kind of very passive and wordy. So going with a recommendation instead. I think that's a good suggestion.
Awesome. Any other ones? I could give it another minute or
I,
so and then we could
I
move on.
think that's it.
Great. Well, then we know this is how the next part goes. I'll offer our suggestion here. So this is what we kind of put together for this specific section. So you can see that we do like lists. If you've ever been on Aleo's website, we have a lot of lists in our content because there's a lot of things that involve lists or things that people need to remember. Like if we're doing driver's licenses or state IDs, there's always a list of things that you need. And bullet points just make it much easier instead of putting it in a paragraph and just adding a bunch of commas and listing it out within that paragraph. That's not as plain language. So you can see from here, our example goes as follows. People of all ages could benefit from eating or more potassium, fiber, and vitamin E. Adults may benefit from eating more calcium, vitamin A, vitamin C, and magnesium. Children 9 or above may benefit from eating more calcium and magnesium. So what we did here is essentially we we split it into those age groups that were suggested within that paragraph. So we put people of all ages within one section. When they talk about specifically adults, we split that into a section and then broke it down into lists. And then we have children 9 or above that was mentioned. And then we list out what children 9 or above can benefit from eating more calcium and magnesium. All right, we will go now in.
Marson, oh,
Yes, go for it.
for the sake of time, do we want to open it up for general questions too?
Sure. So
Um,
do we end at 1:30?
yes,
Okay. Well, you know what?
but
I'll
we
go.
could do the last one. Yeah.
I'll do the exercise. I won't read it. I'll read it and then I'll read it, and then if anyone has any suggestions, I'll also offer the example, and then yeah, we can then move on to the Q&A part.
Okay,
I have
sounds good.
some minutes for Q&A. So with exercise 3, this one is pretty common when it comes to Medicare, Medicaid, any insurance that you ever seen that describes your benefits. It's always super wordy, convoluted, and it's difficult to read. And the terms they use doesn't necessarily exert confidence from the reader. So you can see this paragraph talks about your Medicare handbook, and it talks about it has a new name, Medicare New, and then it talks about specific updates, including the page number and where you can locate it. It also provides the Medicare URL. And then if you don't have a computer, your local library or senior center may be able to help you access the Medicare website. Um, I'll give like a minute or so. If anyone has any suggestions, uh, feel free to answer them within the next minute, and then I'll just give the example that I provided, and then we could
Yeah.
jump into questions and answers.
I, I think we already have some suggestions coming in. Adding
Yeah,
bullet points and splitting up paragraphs would be good.
yeah,
Um, Change it to a table of contents, title and page number, with short intro paragraph and the link to the new title of the handbook. I think that's a great suggestion. Both are
definitely.
great suggestions.
Awesome. Great. Well, then I'll show our example, and then we can go into the Q&A.
Sounds great.
So this is what we came up with. You can clearly see more white space again with the list. Very helpful. We changed it into your Medicare handbook is now called Medicare and You. This book includes information such as, and then again the descriptions that you saw within the paragraph. We listed them out. Description of your new preventative benefits, your new health plan options, your new rights as a patient, a list of resources for more information, and then there's more information online. So instead of listing out the link or the URL, we put the URL within the word online, which is much more plain language and easily accessible than just spelling out the URL. That's not ideal when you're writing content. Ask your local library or senior center for computer access if you have none. All right.
Thank you, Marson.
Yeah, thanks, Tracy.
And I see we already have one question in the chat. And Allison, if you want to turn on your camera and unmute too, I think this one, I would love to get your thoughts on it. It's asking about what about allowing paralegals to offer limited legal services like evictions, bankruptcies, like they do in some other states like Utah. So kind of getting to that access to justice and how do we expand our reach?
I think that's an excellent idea, and that those programs that are kind of just now getting off the ground in other states hold a lot of promise. I think one of the balancing aspects that needs to be considered and fleshed out, and that's one of the reasons I think Illinois hasn't jumped in, is really what are the barriers for those paralegals to be able to become a limited licensed practitioner, and then is that, are they able to then make a living? So we're still talking about paid legal services. It would of course be in a lower amount than a full attorney, but it may help with those addressing those who are above the poverty line but are not able to afford a private attorney. And so again, I think our solution can't be one size fits all or one project or program to solve the justice gap problem, but I think that this idea of limited license practitioners who are paralegals or have other legal education holds a lot of promise to come.
Great. Thank you so much, Alison. Any other questions? You're welcome to put them in the question feature or raise a hand. Here we have one other. Do you have any tips for plain language for non-native English speakers? Any additional considerations when there may be language barriers? Marcin, do you want to speak to that at all with your translations work?
Sure. I think that's an important thing to talk about because plain language differs from well, language to language. What we consider, long sentences might not, or long words might not necessarily reflect the specific language like Polish or Spanish. And I think that's something that we continually look at when we translate our content. For Spanish, we have guide style guides that we use when writing our content, when there's preferred words that we want to use when we're writing our legal content. I wish Yaima was here. She's our legal content manager. She can speak more to this. But yeah, I mean, even for Polish, when I'm looking at Polish, it's there are simpler words, and again, it's also culturally sensitive words. And translation specifically, you can't necessarily literally translate English to Polish or English to Spanish because there are additional contextual words that may be necessary to convey the specific information. If it's, talking about criminal records expungement or, going to court, there's different words that you might need to include in order to get the information across and be legally accurate, because there might be certain words in Polish or Spanish that you might omit because you just literally translated the English version that may give a different meaning in Spanish and Polish. So that's important when you're translating your information to other languages as well.
Yeah, and I think too, I love this question. It's a really good point that we need to be on the lookout for words and phrases that we use in English that are not going to be familiar to non-native speakers. I think we have so many phrases in English that we don't even think about that we use on a daily basis. Idioms that are just part of our conversational language that are not familiar to non-native English speakers. So I think that's a big part of plain language too, trying to make sure that we're using broadly understandable language. Great
Yeah,
point.
I think that's a good point. I mean, it's like, I don't know, like this event was a barn burner. If you literally translate, oh, sorry, cat here. If you translate that into, Spanish or Polish, like literally, like they're going to be like, why is the barn on fire within this, specific content? So again, you have to be conscious of um, specific sayings and things that might only make sense to people within that specific, language or region even.
Yeah. Yeah. So we have another question about how do we decide to add citations to the law, and specifically at Aleo. Generally, if it's a resource that is attorney facing, I think we sometimes add those citations in. We certainly are looking at whether it would be helpful to self-represented litigants too to have that information and whether that should be added. But anything you would add to that, Marcin? Or I see we have a hand raised too.
No, I think it's good.
Okay. And let's see, we can, Helia, if we could have Helia unmute. I apologize if I'm not saying that correctly. Hmm. Okay, I'm going to peek through the question list to see if we have any others. I also see Mary Brady has a hand raised. If we could let her unmute too. Alison, there's a question about a resource that you mentioned. Oh, sorry, you already answered that. Yeah, the
Yes.
Illinois Court Help.
Yes, and
So,
I also mentioned another resource which I'm putting into the chat right now, which is Illinois Free Legal Answers. And just to clarify, Illinois Court Help, anyone can speak with a trained court guide to receive legal information on procedure and forms, etc., about the Illinois court process. And then Illinois Free Legal Answers is being able to email with an attorney about a particular legal issue and to receive legal advice. But I'll put those into the chat.
thank you so much, Alison. Okay, so I see a few hands raised. Helia and Mary, if either are
Hi.
oh, hi.
Good afternoon. Yes, a question about when you was talking about the language, the buried language, because I speak a different language. So English is my second language. So I would like to have some more information where I can have more class to help me improve the language.
That's a great question. I don't know of those resources off the top of my head. I don't know if you do, Marcin, but I'm happy to look them up and follow up with you.
Oh,
Yeah, I
I
don't.
can just.
I'll go for it. Sorry.
Oh, those can be just emailed to me later.
Okay. Thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think Mary had a hand raised too. And I also see, oh, never mind. No more question for Mary. There's also another question. Have there been any discussions about creating a legal services insurance system for representation, like in medical services? New data suggests that even middle class can no longer afford legal services. Kind of like, do we need to rethink the whole system at this point? Since AI probably can't expand our access that much, even though it might make things more efficient. Yeah, just a thought that someone was throwing out there that I'm trying to paraphrase. I tend to think like Alison that it's probably going to be a lot of different solutions. There's not a one size fits all, and however we can innovate in as many different ways as we can innovate. But yeah, if you have anything else,
Yeah,
Alison.
and I think it's important to realize that not everybody needs a full representation attorney either. So, this person also suggests a shout out to Illinois Justice Corps, which is a fantastic program that happens in a variety of courthouses across the state, which have trained court guys, but that are physically present in the courthouse that can act as that warm handoff for anybody who's coming to court and needs help. And that's an example of sometimes that's all somebody needs is just to know how to get to the courtroom or where to find forms. But it is important to continue to imagine and reimagine how to meet the particular person with the civil legal need where they are and to give them the amount of legal help that they need.
Great, thank you, Alison. Okay, I'm just looking through one last time to make sure we haven't missed any questions. I think hopefully we've gotten them all. Thank you so much for, oh wait, maybe just one last coming in. Oh, there we go. That was just sharing Justice Corp information. I did just want, as we're wrapping up, to say thank you so much to Alison and Marcin for sharing their insights and co-presenting today on this really important topic. Thank you to Steve Urich for running our tech and making sure everything went smoothly. Happy National Volunteer Month to all of our volunteers on the call. Thank you for everything you do. And again, we'll send information for anyone who would like to volunteer and use those plain language skills we talked about today.